Picture this: a successful novelist, a beautiful mansion, and then a frantic 911 call shatters the silence of the night. This is the story of Michael Peterson, and it's a case that, even after 2 decades, has everyone asking one single massive question. So let's dive right in and try to unravel the mystery of the staircase. And really, everything boils down to this one haunting question. Was this just a tragic freak accident, a simple fall down the stairs? Or was it something much, much darker? The perfect crime, hidden behind the facade of a perfect life. All right, so let's go back. The date is December 9th, 2001. It's late at night in Durham, North Carolina. Novelist Michael Peterson makes this desperate 911 call. He says he's just found his wife, Kathleen, lying unconscious at the bottom of their back staircase. Okay, so right from the get-go, we have 2 totally different stories. On one hand, you've got Peterson's account. Kathleen had been drinking, she'd taken a Valium, and she must have had a terrible fall down the stairs. Simple, tragic. But then you have the autopsy, and that story is brutal. It found 7 deep cuts on her head, but here's the weird part: no skull fracture. And the cause of death? It wasn't from hitting her head, it was from bleeding out, just massive blood loss. And if that wasn't strange enough, then came the timeline. The medical examiner figured out that Kathleen had been alive and bleeding for somewhere between 90 minutes and 2 full hours before she actually died. Think about that. That just completely blows up Peterson's story that he found her right after she fell. So, with the physical evidence just not lining up with a simple fall, investigators started looking really hard at the only other person in that house, Michael Peterson. And that's when the prosecution starts to build its case against him, brick by incriminating brick. The prosecution's whole case really came down to 3 main things. First, those injuries. They said, no way was that a fall. That's from being hit repeatedly with some kind of blunt object. Second, they needed a motive. Well, they argued that Kathleen had just found out Michael was secretly bisexual and having affairs with men. And third, you guessed it, the classic motivator: money. A life insurance policy worth a cool $1.5 million. Yeah, and the assistant DA, Freda Black, put it pretty bluntly. She said, "We believe that once she learned this information, that an argument ensued and a homicide occurred." So their theory wasn't some cold, pre-planned murder. It was a crime of passion, something that just exploded in the heat of the moment after a shocking discovery. But of course, the defense had a totally different take. They were like, hold on a second. Their marriage was happy. Kathleen knew all about Michael's bisexuality and was totally fine with it. And they hit on a huge point. The prosecution had no murder weapon. None. I mean, the prosecutors had suggested it might have been this fireplace poker called a blow poke. But then, get this, the defense actually found the thing, sitting in the garage, totally clean. So the case is kind of stuck, right? It's his word against the evidence. But then, the prosecution pulls out something from Michael Peterson's past, and it is so eerily similar, it's almost unbelievable. This is where the whole story just takes a wild, shocking turn. Let's rewind. We're going back to 1985, when the Petersons were living in Germany. A good friend of theirs, a woman named Elizabeth Ratliff, is found dead. And the scene? It's just disturbingly familiar. She's at the bottom of her staircase, and she has head injuries. Back then, the authorities ruled it an accident. But here's the connection that just sent a shockwave through the courtroom. Who was the last person known to have seen Elizabeth Ratliff alive? You got it, Michael Peterson. He was at her house that night. So as you can imagine, that Durham prosecutors hear this and they immediately have Ratliff's body exhumed. And the very same medical examiner who did Kathleen's autopsy performs a new one on Elizabeth Ratliff and changes her cause of death from accident to homicide. The prosecution's argument was simple. Lightning doesn't strike twice. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a blueprint. Peterson had done this before. So even with the defense fighting hard, that combination of the incredibly bloody scene and this strikingly similar death in Germany, it was just too much for the jury to ignore. But, and this is a huge but, the verdict was not the end of this story. Not even close. Because in the years that followed, the state's case just started to fall apart. Okay, so October 2003, Michael Peterson is found guilty, sentenced to life in prison. And for years, all these wild theories pop up. You might have even heard of the owl theory, the idea that an owl attacked Kathleen. But the real bombshell, the thing that changed everything, dropped in 2011.
It turns out the prosecution's star witness, their main bloodstain analyst, a guy named Dwayne Daver, was fired for serious misconduct. And that revelation, well, it blew the whole case open and led directly to Peterson getting a brand new trial.
And listen to what the judge said. His words were just scathing. This wasn't some honest mistake. Judge Hudson found that Dwayne Deaver, the expert whose testimony was absolutely critical to the conviction, had given materially misleading and deliberately false testimony. He had intentionally lied on the stand.
And we're not talking about small lies. Deaver claimed he'd worked on 500 cases. The real number? 4. He said he wrote 200 reports. The truth? 47. He basically invented his entire resume for the jury. And once all that came out, his expert testimony was worthless. The state's whole case was built on a foundation of lies. So that original conviction, it just couldn't stand. So after spending 8 years behind bars, Michael Peterson is suddenly out on bond, waiting for a whole new trial. But at this point, it's been 16 years. 16 years of fighting. And honestly, neither side really wanted to go through another massive, expensive, drawn-out trial. So the case ends not with a dramatic verdict, but with this really interesting and complex legal move.
To get how this all wrapped up, you need to know about something called an Alford plea. It's kind of a weird thing in the American legal system. It lets a defendant plead guilty and accept a sentence, but, and this is the key part, they don't have to admit they actually did the crime. They get to maintain their innocence. It's like saying, look, I swear I didn't do this, but I know you have enough evidence that a jury would probably convict me anyway, so let's just end this.
And that is exactly what Michael Peterson did. He'd already been convicted, then he was granted a new trial. But instead of rolling the dice on that new trial, he took this Alford plea. He pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, manslaughter, and the judge sentenced him to time served.
And what does time served mean here? Well, Peterson had already been in prison for 98.5 months. That's more than 8 years, and that was actually longer than the sentence for the manslaughter charge. So when the judge banged the gavel, his debt to society was, legally speaking, paid in full. And just like that, on February 24th, 2017, after this insane legal journey that lasted almost 16 years, Michael Peterson walked out of the courtroom a free man. Now, on paper, he's legally guilty of manslaughter, but if you ask him or any of his supporters, he's an innocent man who was the victim of a terrible tragedy. So, the court case is officially closed. But the mystery? The real question? That's as open as it's ever been. The Alford plea gave everyone a legal ending, but it gave us 0 answers about what actually happened. Which means we're left right back where we started, with this one big unsettling question. What really happened at the bottom of those stairs?